Don't forget to check out the official CommanderGuys Discord server. It's the best way to stay in touch with the community, our players, and Devin and I. If you want to support the channel, you can do so directly over on our newly revamped Patreon, and join Morello here in this list. Alternatively, you can support us at no additional cost to yourself whenever you make a purchase over at TCG Player. Simply start any purchase you want to make by clicking our affiliate link down in the description, and a portion of your total price will go back to the channel. Thanks as always for your support. Hey everyone, it's Matt here, and welcome back to another CommanderGuys gameplay video. Our first information on Zendikar Rising has been revealed, and there's links down in the description that lead to it. But here's the packaging that was revealed. Also, I made a whole bunch of changes to my recording setup, so my audio should be better this week. We've got a really fun game with a surprising outcome, so let's go ahead and jump straight into player introductions. First off this week, we have Danny, playing Syr Gwyn, hero of Ashvale. Danny is a Voltron-focused build with a Knight Tribal sub-theme, which is looking to use Gwyn's attack trigger to offset the draw issues that many aggro decks have. Danny kept a Knight of the Ende Legion, Skull Clamp, Colossus Hammer, Mask of Memory, Murderous Rider, a Swamp, and a Plains. Next up is Spencer, playing Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. This is a Lifegain-oriented combo deck, which is looking to slowly drain out Spencer's opponents with Vito's ability. Spencer kept a pair of Swamps, Blood Artist, Altar of Dementia, Grim Haruspex, Magus of the Coffers, and Liliana Vess. Then comes Devin, playing Grayson's Nikya of the Old Ways. It's Hydra Tribal, and what more do you want me to say? Devin kept Castle Garenbrig, Hero's Bane, a Forest, Cultivate, Unbound Flourishing, Unclaimed Territory, and Uvenwald Hydra. Last but not least, we have Grayson, playing Grumgully's Goblin Gang. It's Goblin Tribal, and is looking to cast Grumgully quickly, before rushing out an army of Goblin tokens. Grayson kept a Forest, a pair of Mountains, Castle Garenbrig, Opal Palace, Siege Gang Commander, and Goblin Dark Dwellers. Danny starts us off. He drops a Swamp, and casts a Knight of the Ende Legion before passing off. And then Spencer drops a Swamp, Devin drops a Forest, and Grayson drops a Mountain. Danny drops a Plains, and casts a Mask of Memory. He then moves to combat, and hits Spencer for 1, before passing off. Spencer drops another Swamp. He casts a Blood Artist, and passes as well. Devin drops a Mountain, and passes, and then Grayson closes out round 2 with a Forest. Danny drops a Plains. He casts History of Benalia, and as it enters, he creates a 2/2 Knight token. He then hits Devin for a point of damage in combat, and passes turn. Spencer casts a Reassembling Skeleton, and misses a land drop, before passing off. Devin drops an Unclaimed Territory, naming Hydras. He casts a Cultivate, and uses it to bring in a Forest tapped, and 1 to hand, before passing turn. Grayson drops an untapped Castle Garenbrig. He casts his commander Grumgully, and passes as well. Danny draws for turn, and adds another counter to History of Benalia, before creating a 2/2 Knight. He drops a Swamp, and then pays to equip Knight of the Ende Legion with Mask of Memory. Danny then moves to combat and pings Devin again. On that damage, Danny draws 2 before discarding a Midnight Reaper. In main 2, he casts a Skull Clamp before paying to equip it to one of his tokens and passing turn. Spencer drops a Swamp. He casts a Grim Haruspex and passes as well. Devin drops a Forest. He casts a Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and then drops an untapped Castle Garenbrig as his second land. He then casts a Llanowar Tribe, and passes off. Grayson drops a Mountain. He casts Tuk Tuk the Explorer, which enters with a +1/+1 counter thanks to Grumgully, before Grayson passes off. Danny draws for turn and puts his final counter onto History of Benalia, before sacrificing it and giving his knights +2/+1 until end of turn. He drops a Mountain, and then moves straight to combat. He swings Coddle and a Knight token at Spencer, while also swinging his Clamped token at Grayson. Spencer blocks Coddle with Reassembling Skeleton, and Grayson blocks with Tuk Tuk. And after damage, Danny draws 2 from his token dying. Spencer drains Danny for 3 thanks to Blood Artist, and draws a card from Grim Haruspex, and then Grayson creates his Golem from Tuk Tuk, which enters with a +1/+1 counter. In his main 2, Danny casts a Lightning Greaves. He then moves to end step, and adds a counter to Coddle, before passing off. Spencer casts his commander Vito, and misses another land drop, before passing turn. Devin starts off his turn by casting Nikya. He follows up with an Uvenwald Hydra, and goes to bring in a tapped Temple of the False God as it ETBs. Devin then moves to combat, and swings Dryad of the Elysian Grove at Danny. Devin then passes off. Grayson drops an Opal Palace. He casts the Doubling Season, and passes turn to Danny. Danny drops a Plains. He casts his commander Syr Gwyn, and equips it with Lightning Greaves, before free equipping his Knight token with Skull Clamp. Danny then moves to combat, and swings Gwyn at Spencer, while swinging his Skull Clamped Knight token at Grayson. 2 equipped creatures he controls attacked, so Danny draws a total of 2 cards, while losing 2 life. And then neither Spencer nor Grayson blocks. In main 2, Danny switches around his equipment a bit, and then misses his +1/+1 counter for Coddle as he passes turn. Spencer drops a Swamp, before casting an Altar of Dementia. He then pays to return Reassembling Skeleton tapped, and passes off to Devin. Devin drops a Forest, as Danny remembers his counter for Knight of the Ebon Legion. Devin then moves to combat, and swings Uvenwald Hydra at Danny, who blocks it with Coddle. The Knight dies to this damage, and Danny draws 2 from Skull Clamp, before getting drained by Blood Artist again. In main 2, Devin casts a Protean Hydra, where X is 20. It enters with 20 +1/+1 counters, and Devin passes turn. Grayson casts the Siege Gang Commander. It enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters, and then creates a total of 6 Goblin tokens, which each enter with 2 +1/+1 counters as well. Grayson then decides to hold his creatures back as blockers, and passes off to Danny. Danny drops a Mountain. He casts a Valiant Knight, which he equips with Skull Clamp. He needs blockers as well, so he discards down, before passing off. And at his end step, Spencer sacrifices Reassembling Skeleton to Altar of Dementia. He misorders things at first, milling, before drawing from Grim Haruspex. But everyone catches it, so they step things back and properly resolve the stack. Spencer draws the Grim Tutor he mistakenly revealed, and mills over the Disciple of Bolas that he drew, before moving to his turn. Spencer untaps, and remembers his Blood Artist trigger, which he uses to drain Danny again. He casts a Golgari Thug, and pays to bring back Reassembling Skeleton tapped, before immediately sacrificing it to Altar of Dementia again. He draws from Grim Haruspex, and then mills himself for 1, before draining Grayson this time. Spencer then misses another land drop, and passes off. Devin casts an Apocalypse Hydra, where X is 14. It enters with 28 counters, and he then moves to combat and swings his Protean Hydra at Grayson, who blocks with a Goblin token. The token dies, as the Hydra loses 3+1/+1 counters. And then Devin moves to end step and adds 6 counters back to the Hydra, before passing turn. Grayson casts Domri, Anarch of Bolas. He upticks Domri to add a mana, and casts an Icon of Ancestry, surprising no one by naming goblins. Danny then points out that Domri should be at 7 loyalty thanks to Doubling Season. It entered with 6 loyalty rather than 3, and gained an additional 1 from activation. Grayson then passes off. Danny drops a mountain. He then gives us his best Facebook impression.
I can violate somebody's privacy really bad.
Before shuffling his Lightning Greaves over to Valiant Knight. He casts a Colossus Hammer, and free equips it to Gwyn, before doubling down on his hammers with a Loxodon Warhammer, which he also free equips. He then shuffles all of his equipment with Skullclamp to Gwyn, and moves around his Lightning Greaves as needed to make sure he can. Danny then moves to combat, and swings Gwyn at Grayson for 19 trample damage. On that attack, he draws a card, and loses a life. Grayson decides to take the full hit, and Danny gains a total of 19 from lifelink, before drawing 2 from Mask of Memory, and discarding a Temple of Malice. Danny goes to pass off, and at his end step, Spencer sacrifices the Thug to Altar of Dementia. He draws from Grim Haruspex, and drains Devin with Blood Artist, before putting the Thug back on top of his library, and milling it over thanks to Altar of Dementia. Spencer then moves to his turn, and drops a Swamp. He then tries to catch up on lands a bit with a Solemn Simulacrum. He uses the Sad Robot to bring in a tapped Swamp, before passing off to Devin. Devin drops a Forest. He activates Apocalypse Hydra once to ping down Danny's Knight token, and Danny draws from Skullclamp as Devin moves to combat and swings Protean Hydra that direction. In response to attackers, Danny swift ends the Protean Hydra and loses 2 life. Devin casts a Hero's Bane in main 2, and passes off while complaining about his lack of red mana. Grayson casts Squee Goblin Nabob, and in response, Devin activates Hero's Bane 3 times, bringing its total +1/+1 counters up to 32. Grayson then casts a Treasure Map, and passes off once again. Danny drops a Clifftop Retreat. He casts open the Armory, and goes to grab Blackblade Reforged to hand. He then casts the Blackblade, and follows it up with a Sword of Sinew and Steel, before shuffling around equipment, so everything but Skullclamp ends up on Syr Gwyn again. As that happens, Devin realizes this.
Oh my god, my Dryad makes all my lands tap for whatever I want.
Danny also equips Valiant Knight with Skullclamp, and then moves to combat, swinging Syr Gwyn at Grayson for lethal. He gains 30 from lifelink, before remembering his attack trigger draw. He also targets Altar with the Sinew and Steel trigger, and in response, Spencer sacrifices Solemn, draining Danny with Blood Artist, drawing 2, and milling over 2. Danny then declines his trigger from Mask of Memory, and casts a Rimrock Knight, before passing off. Spencer pays to bring back Reassembling Skeleton. He hardcasts a Dread Return to bring back Fleshbag Marauder, which forces everyone to sacrifice a creature. as Spencer drains Danny with Blood Artist 3 times. He then casts Dread Return for its flashback cost, sacrificing Reassembling Skeleton, Blood Artist, and Grim Haruspex to return Fleshbag Marauder again. After he pays the costs, Spencer draws an additional 2 cards from Grim Haruspex, while also draining Danny 3 more times. Everyone then sacrifices a creature as Fleshbag enters again, and Spencer plays a land for turn, before passing off. Devin casts the Finale of Devastation, where X is 11, and goes to bring in a Vigor, before every creature he has gets +11/+11 and haste. Devin then moves to combat, and swings Hero's Bane at Danny for 42. Danny just takes that damage, and with nothing else this turn, Devin passes off. Danny casts Murderous Rider. He equips it with both Skull Clamp and Lightning Greaves, and moves to combat. He swings both Murderous Rider and Syr Gwyn at Devin, who blocks with both Dryad and Vigor. In response to blockers, Danny flashes in Embercleave, which brings his total commander damage more than high enough to eliminate Devin with first strike damage. As a result, he should gain 31, since he never gets a chance to deal regular combat damage. He then equips Syr Gwyn with Lightning Greaves, and passes off. Spencer drops a Swamp, and I don't normally do this, but I'm just gonna let the moment speak for itself.
Hey, Devin.
Yeah.
Watch this.
I'm ready.
With an enemy dead?
Yeah. He has 2 creatures.
Yeah, I don't need that. Rindscar Demon?
Rindscar Demon.
What do I have mana for?
Oh, Beck.
Her butt is dead.
What's that? You're dead.
So as a recap, Spencer reanimated Runescarred Demon. As it entered, he tutored up Blood Tribute, and had just enough mana remaining to cast it, paying the kicker cost by tapping Vito. As that happens, Danny loses half his life total rounded up, and since the kicker was paid, Spencer also gains an equal amount of life. That life gain triggers Vito, which then drains Danny for the remainder of his life total, ultimately meaning that Spencer walks away with this win. So that's gonna do it for this week. Thanks as always to our players for being a part of this game. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and make sure to subscribe to see more of our Commander content, and to help us reach our goal of 5,000 subs by the end of the year. You can also support us over at Patreon, and join this list here. Thank you to Morello for your support so far. Alternatively, you can start any order you make at TCG Player by clicking our affiliate link down in the video's description. If you do, a portion of your total price goes directly towards supporting the channel at no additional cost to you. I'll see you back here next week with another gameplay video. And as always, thank you for watching.